Okay, in this phase of the software, we're going to be doing tooth alignment. One thing I haven't mentioned in the previous videos, I do apologize for that, is if you look up top here, it actually tells you tooth alignment, which phase you're in. So if you're asking questions, you need support on message boards or email or whatnot, make sure to keep an eye on which phase of the software you're in. That'll help us to help you and also to track your progress. So anyway, right now this panel has the most to do, and you can kind of go in whichever order you want. I always recommend working top down, but in this panel it's going to give us a little more flexibility in how you move through the software. So I want to show you a couple things about what's going on here. Of course, we can toggle back and forth between the mandible and the maxilla. Okay. Now, since I haven't clicked on that yet, it's going to have to, it says initializing the collisions. It's determining kind of how things are colliding with one another. But once we do that, we can click back and forth quite quickly and easily. Also, once again, we had the buccal bite registration. It's still there. That way, if you need to orient models, if they haven't lined up properly, you still have that ability to do that here. And of course, the checkbox here for show opposing arch. That way, if you want to show the arch, that way you can see where the teeth are as you're doing alignment of one arch as opposed to another. That is your opportunity. Okay, so now the software has finished that little collision calculation, and so now we walk through the rest of the buttons. I can now go back and forth pretty quickly and easily from arch to arch. That first time takes a little while for it to calculate. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to stick with the lower. I'm going to turn off the show opposing arch. Now you're going to see lots of little different dots and arrows and whatnot, and you got to figure out, okay, what are all of these? First of all, if I move a tooth, just don't worry about where I'm moving this, but you can see the IPR is calculating live. Okay, this number is going to increase or decrease depending on how much overlaps. That's the IPR. Okay, we can also turn on diastema. Now diastema is something that in the software in this current version is a little bit slow because it has to run a calculation to determine the space size. It is my hope that with time that will be an active calculation just like the other space, just like the IPR. But for now, most of the time we're not intending to leave diastemas, but that is what that's for. For instance, if you're doing peg laterals and you want to leave space. Now, why is there existing IPR here and here? That's really because I didn't take enough time to be very careful with my segmentation lines back here. I knew I wasn't moving these teeth, and I most likely left a little space between the two lines. And I did the same thing over here. Okay, so don't worry about that. It's not a big deal. I'm just letting you know why do you see that on occasion. I'm going to turn off the diastemas because once I move a tooth, it'll have to recalculate. Initial position. Let's move some teeth just crazy out of the way. Do some weird movement. If I click on initial position, I can see where the teeth originally were. Okay? It just gives me a chance to kind of, oh, okay, that's where the teeth are, where they need to go. Okay. Now, here is this line is the snap to curve. Okay. There's a little node back here where you can move this around. You're moving in two planes. Notice if I drag it all the way over here, it's still flat to the plane of occlusion. Okay. I'm only moving it in two dimensions. Well, the purpose of the snap to curve is it's intending to line up with the dots or how we want them to create a curve of the desired arch. So let's go to reset all teeth right down here. Put all the teeth back where they were. And now let's try and create a curve that looks ideal for this patient's mouth. Now, I will tell you, I don't use the snap curve a lot. It is a useful tool, but I don't really feel the need to use it personally, except for on the more complex cases where I'm moving a lot of teeth. If I'm just moving foreign incisors, I tend to just do it. But to show you how this works, I've created a curve kind of the way I want the teeth to look. Snap on a different tooth if you don't want to be able to see this, we call the pivot, this alignment sphere. And so now if I click on snap all teeth, the teeth snap to that curve. Okay, pretty straightforward, pretty convenient. If you change the height of this, I don't do that in most cases, but it will affect things kind of trying to retract even more because it's lining up the pivot of the tooth, which is this guy right here. So it doesn't make, moving the curve higher and higher does not actually move the teeth higher. It just, because the curve right here, the green line that bisects the tooth, is pointing at the curve. So if I bring it down here, the green line will point at the curve. Okay, so that's what the height difference is for. It's not really much different than just pulling the curve in a little bit. So anyway, so here's the teeth snap to curve. We'll go ahead and leave this function out. That's pretty well aligned, so I'm not going to mess with that anymore. But I will, on the upper arch, I'll do some more manual alignment. Okay, but so we've seen you can snap an individual tooth. So if we reset all the teeth, I could say, well, I want to snap this tooth, but I don't want to snap the others. There we go. Or say I've snapped all of them, then I've done some little adjustment to contact areas, then I move one tooth and I want to just bring it back. That way I don't have to reset everything. Also, be aware, Control Z is your friend. Control Z means undo. Also, this arrow is undo. Okay, so, and last but not least, in this phase, as far as adjustment, is adjust pivot. If I click here, I can actually change the pivot without changing the tooth. Okay? Now, I of course don't like that, but if the software did a poor job of calculating the pivot, because it approximates based on those 2 dots. It's just 2 dots of information. And if your tooth is wildly out of alignment, it will struggle to get an ideal pivot. Okay? This allows you to adjust it. Okay. One big change for those that have been using the software for a while may notice that the pivot is now much farther down the tooth. Okay. It used to be that it was up closer to this line right here in the middle is sort of the center of rotation of the tooth, which should be somewhere in the middle of the root surface where the tooth would actually pivot. It's not going to pivot at the top, the crest of bone, at the apex of the tooth, at the gingival margin. It's going to be somewhere in the middle of the bone attachment. If you don't like that, tools, preferences, and here are your pivot lengths. You can actually change all of them. I'm actually changing this one as I speak. I'm going to hit cancel because I do not want to change it like that. But you can change them to wherever you think is appropriate for each different tooth. Reset that. Hit cancel. Okay, so we are done aligning the lower teeth. Now I'm going to go to Maxilla. And so now I can see the lower teeth, where they are, where they need to be, and I can start aligning accordingly. Okay. Again, I could use the snap to curve, but instead I'm going to show you how to manually align these teeth. I'm just going to rotate this tooth. That one's a pretty easy one. I'm going to procline this tooth a little bit, and I'm going to intrude it a little bit. I'm going to rotate this tooth a little bit. How I specifically correct the alignment on this does not matter. I'm just showing you the various tools that can be used. Because of this intruding, I've created a little bit of diastema. I'm going to kind of close that, swing that over here just a touch, and now I'm going to correct this tooth. Now this is actually the most difficult tooth to treat in this arch. I can tell you that from both just by evaluating the case, but also having treated the case myself, this is definitely the tooth that is the most difficult. You'll notice that the pivot is somewhat off center here, so I'm going to click on Adjust Pivot. I'm going to swing it back here and rotate it a little bit. And now it's coming more through the center of this actual tooth. Because it's slightly torqued, it makes it more difficult. And it also is going to make aligner therapy for this patient more difficult to begin with. So expecting a perfect result is going to be challenging, but that's how we try to fix that. So I fixed the alignment. I'm going to set the IPR invisible because I think it's a little bit distracting for now. I'm going to try and torque this root a little bit to treat it. Whether you're comfortable doing that with aligners or not is up to you. And that looks about right to me. Now let's turn on the IPR, and we see that, what kind of IPR are we okay with? I'm okay with less than a tenth, just over a tenth, just over a tenth. And this one's a little bit much. Now, when you're segmenting teeth, you don't see this when you're having someone else do the whole workup for you, but when you're doing it yourself, you might notice these numbers may not be completely accurate because how good was your segmentation? Was it accurate? So I'm going to say it was fairly accurate in this case. And so I'm going to accept the fact that I have to do some IPR on this tooth because the options would be to procline it, but then you're going to procline all the anteriors, and I'm not really looking to create any overjet in this patient. So I can either leave it there. I can also try to move this tooth back a little bit, move this one a little bit. Now I'm planning on essentially having to torque teeth because if you're trying to slide teeth with aligners, you're effectively, well, in general, you're sweeping a root. That's much more difficult than tipping a tooth. But now the midlines are lined up pretty darn well, and that's it. So I'm going to move on from here. You kind of get the idea of what I'm doing. Let's turn off the IPR. You can see the final alignment. And so now, once you're satisfied with that, we have to come down here and I'm going to click on the movement limits, and I get to pick whether I want monthly, bi-weekly, or weekly. Now, bear in mind, these are technically suggestions for time. Don't think of them as standards for time. What they really are is aggressive. Monthly means you're going to be, okay, let's take a step back. Weekly means you're going to be using 4 times as many retainers to establish the same amount of movement as you would in monthly. It doesn't actually change how fast teeth move. It's just saying, oh, I want more fine control. I want to change aligners every week as opposed to once a month. So effectively, you could say the monthly wear is more aggressive because they're doing 4 times the amount of movement per tray as the weekly. So it's effectively aggressive, medium, and conservative. So let's go ahead and stick with monthly for this, just for this ease of planning. And I'm going to continue to click on Edit Steps. Okay. Just so you know, this step right here allows us to add a root to the tooth. So if you want to know what it looks like as you move a tooth, how does the root move with it? I can line up the root with the tooth. I can say, click on the adjust position, and now when I move the tooth, the root moves with it. Okay? So that is the purpose there. That is particularly useful if you're going to incorporate the cone beam, the CT image of the patient. Okay? All right, so we're going to click to Edit Steps. Edit Steps is where we get to actually look at the movement that is generated by the algorithm to accomplish our end goals, which this is our end goal, starting at the beginning and ending here. How do we get there? So I will pick up the next video at the Edit Steps phase.